Welcome everybody to tonight's program. Tonight is the second in our two-part Democracy in Crisis series. Last week's program on civic education can be found on our YouTube channel, and it was just fabulous if you missed it. Programming which promotes civic engagement is central to the museum's mission and is inspired by Lippitt family's commitment to public service. And with this, we are so happy that we have partnered for the last 7 years with the Providence League of Women Voters for this community conversation series. And we want to give special thanks to the League of Women Voters Rhode Island Education Fund for financial support for the program. Tonight's program features 3 people who have thought a lot about the intersections of journalism, media literacy, and free speech to the health of our democracy. Joan is a longtime League of Women Voters member and a longtime presenter and moderator for this amazing series. And we are so glad that she is here with us again to join us. So thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Joan.
Well, the League of Women Voters is thrilled to be part of this conversation about fake news or media literacy. I think of it as a Frankenstein monster. It was Malcolm Muggeridge who said that future historians will surely see us as having created in the media a Frankenstein monster whom no one knows how to control, and marvel that we should have so meekly subjected ourselves to its destructive and malign influence. So our challenge as citizens in a democracy is to wade through the sea of from Twitter and blogs and Facebook and newspapers and radio talk shows and cheap news, what is true, what is plausible, and crucially, what is dangerously false. Today, so many Americans, more than half registered Republicans, according to one poll, which in itself may be fake news, believe the big lie that the election was stolen. That kind of belief undercuts democracy. So we're eager to hear from our 3 panelists on this dangerous Frankenstein. So shall we start with, let's see, whom shall we, is everybody on? I think the person to start with is Renee Hobbs, who focuses on helping people media literacy, reading through the media. How do you swim through the flotsam and jetsam? Renee, do you want to?
Sure. You want me to introduce myself or answer that question?
Just, but your bio is already on the screen.
Oh, got it. Sure. Yeah. So how do people wade through all this media we're receiving? You know, it's always been the case that people have had a lot of choices for information, for entertainment, and persuasion. From my point of view, it's really important to help people understand that we're living in an attention economy where a whole lot of industries are very profitably intent on capturing and holding your attention. So the more metacognitive we are about what grabs our attention, then the better we are at being able to wade through it.
Okay. Ed Fitzpatrick represents a newspaper. And the question is, how do you pick out what you focus on and what you refute? And when you refute something, do you give it more traction? What role do you play in promulgating misinformation?
Well, thank you for asking me to take part. Yeah, I'm at the Boston Globe, was at the Providence Journal for a long time, and I'm on the board of the New England First Amendment Coalition. So this is a very timely topic, and especially at a time when we see all these claims of fake news and what's going on over in Russia. You know, I mean, I was just struck by that moment of the Russian TV producer Marina Oskannikova bursting onto a live broadcast and, you know, denouncing the war and the courage she showed in pushing back against fake news. And, you know, what they're calling fake news is really real news over there. They can't even say that it's a war. It's a special military operation, and the you know, you can go to prison for 15 years if you do what she did. So just to hold her up as showing a tremendous amount of courage. But like, as you just said in the introduction, let's recognize that, you know, she was standing up for truth and against propaganda, and we're facing an assault on truth here in this country. And a lot of people here are buying the propaganda and the lies. And you know, you're right. There was a poll that showed 68% of Republicans believe the election was stolen, 6% of Democrats, 26% of independents. So tens of millions of people in this country are buying the big lie that the election was stolen, even though there's no evidence of significant voter fraud. So yeah, to get to, I'm sorry to take a while to get to the meteor question was, well, what do you do? You know, I think we do what journalists always do, is that we tell the truth. You know, we're not the gatekeepers anymore. We can't just assume that no one's going to hear the president. You know, you can on Twitter or TikTok or whatever, the message is going to go out. As a journalist, I think my mission is to go out and present the facts, to report the facts, and call a lie a lie when we see it.
Okay, thank you. And Lynette, I'm hoping to hear you talk about protecting. More recently, in my lifetime, there was Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, and we want to protect the open marketplace for people to dissent and to speak their mind. How hard is it, or how easy, or how do you see the role of protecting free speech when speech is so cheap now? I mean, anybody can do a blog.
Well, you can look at that two ways. I mean, I mostly have in my career, I've done a number of cases for the ACLU. Right now, I'm only doing cases for the ACLU of Rhode Island. And if you look back in history, the ACLU and my own personal view of the First Amendment is you just don't pick the good news from the bad news. You have to, because all will be lost if the government can dictate what is orthodox and what is not. And we see, I mean, you know, between the time that you asked me to be on this program and today, you know, all I need to do is, you know, as lawyers do, point to Exhibit A is what's going on in Russia. The unfortunate problem with news that or information that's not accurate is that if you try to police it, which is what the First Amendment is all about, if you try to police and say only those who are telling a certain viewpoint can be heard, then you will hear nothing. And so from my standpoint, and it's consistent with the ACLU, we advocate for whoever the speaker is. And many times that speaker is someone whose viewpoint we really don't particularly agree with. The case that I remember from before I went to law school had to do with the Nazis marching in Skokie. And that was when I had a lot of arguments at home with my mother, who had basically grown up during you know, the Holocaust. She was in this country, but that framed all of her frame of reference, and she could not understand how anyone could support their marching. What they were doing was reprehensible. But once you say they can't march because it's going to be upsetting to the people who are there, as long as they're peaceful and they express their viewpoint, however reprehensible it is, the First Amendment protects that. And that's where I stand, which is the vigilance for the First Amendment. And really, unfortunately, a lot of times that means sacrificing the truth of the news to support some really horrible viewpoints on the theory that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And if you have all views out, then people who are receiving them are going to be able to make their own choices.
Okay, well, here's a question for all of you now that we're eager to air all news. If you look at television commercials for drugs, you see all these disclaimers: can cause seizures, can cause fits, can cause death. Should there be some kind of disclaimer for everything that goes out, for the blogs, for the websites, to show that the Happy Nutrition blog is from the candy company, that it lets you see who's maybe not deeply hacking, but get some sense of who's issuing the news as we see. I cited the poll of voters, which was in the Washington Post. So I just caught the same one Ed cited, but I don't know where that was some national religion something poll. And I didn't click 5 times to find out who put out that poll. So how much deep disclosure should we do? Should we ask of people? Should newspapers do? What do you think?
Yeah.
Right now it's easy to do anything.
So we can think about this from the point of view of what should consumers do, and then we can think about it from what should creators do. And one of the things I think
Creators.
let's think about it first from what do consumers do, because we better be always asking who's the author and what's the purpose. That is the obligation of the consumer, right? It's on us to identify who's the author and what's the purpose. And what is the obligation of the creator? Well, we know a lot about what doesn't work. Over the last 5 years, there have been a lot of experiments because, you know, trust in journalism is at it's at the lowest. Every year we keep saying it's at the lowest level ever, and then it gets lower, right? So a lot of experiments have been done. For example, what if journalists labeled their content? This is an opinion piece. This is a news piece. This is an analysis piece, or this is sponsored content paid for by, you know, a big company. It turns out that when news is labeled like that, news consumers don't seem to notice.
What do you think, Ed? Does that work?
It doesn't work.
Well, does the Globe, is that clear at the Globe? Reporting, strict reporting versus editorials versus op-eds versus.
Oh, like a lot of newspapers, we have an opinion page with, you know, letters to the editor and the opinion of the newspaper's editorial board, and you know, news is on the news pages. But you know, the idea, you know, you've seen Facebook and some of the platforms trying to say, you know, beware of this content. This sounds suspect, and you know, raising questions. And so that's all fine. But I would not want the government to decide who is a legitimate speaker and who's an illegitimate speaker. That's where I see the danger. I mean, the First Amendment is meant to fence in the government. You know, you'll hear people cry, oh, well, Facebook is trampling First Amendment. No, it's a private company, and they can put a label on what they want, and that's all fine. I just don't want to see the government saying you should listen to this person or that person. But I do think it is, you know, the responsibility. I would put the onus back on the reader or the viewer to do things like Renee is talking about here, to have to be media literate. Because like when I grew up, there was ABC, NBC, you know, Walter Cronkite would tell you, and that's the way it is. But now that, you know, there's so many voices, so many platforms out there. There's a million people telling you the way it is, and a lot of people are telling you that's not the way it is at all. So you got to be careful. You have to be an informed consumer, a smarter consumer of the news today. And so that's why I think you know, making media literacy a key part of basic civics education is more important now than ever.
Do you agree, Lynette, that how do you feel the responsibility on the consumer, the voter, versus requiring the way drug companies do? Wait,
Well,
this is
I mean,
right.
as a practical matter, drug companies, when they advocate or advertise to sell their product, they're engaging in speech. It's generally viewed as commercial speech, and there's some greater regulation when health and safety is involved. You've got the Federal Trade Commission and the FDA. They'll punish them if they misstate what their drugs do, and that's why you get those massive disclaimers. Talking about your first question, which was people put stuff out, you don't know who they are. Well, whether it's right or wrong, and I think it's okay. That's a time-honored tradition. It goes way back to before the revolution. Thomas Paine, which wrote Common Sense. That was an anonymous publication, and it's baked into the cake of our First Amendment that people don't have to disclose. And that's where you get into the consumer, perhaps, hopefully, having a more jaundiced view when they don't know who's writing it or why. And I think in a lot of cases they do, although some of them also think when the government's saying it, they don't believe that either. So it depends on where you're coming from. I think that the big social media platforms right now are the purveyors of a huge amount of the news, or how people receive the news. And a lot of that is incorrect. And I don't believe they should be regulated in terms of censoring their speech. But right now, as compared to the print media, and I view the Globe as print media, even though most people receive it digitally now, there's a special category for certain media platforms. I think it's called 230, which gives them absolute immunity, even if they publish and republish junk. So that's an issue that, way back when, to start the internet, it might have made sense, but there might be some basis to, again, I don't believe in prior restraint, which is called censorship, to stop people from saying things, but to maybe hold them a little bit more accountable than where they are now, which is not at all. Right now, the main reason that groups like Facebook and YouTube are pulling back on some of the content that they put forward is because of the outrage of the global community, which is, I just was reading in today's Washington Post that in the first couple days of the invasion of Ukraine, there was a huge spike in access to government channels on YouTube and Facebook that were the Russian government. And when YouTube shut them down, they had like zero impact. So there are things that they can do. If the government requires them to do it, then from a civil liberties standpoint, I have a big problem with it.
Well, what about, it's always been illegal to yell fire in a crowded theater unless there's a fire. Do you propose, there's speech that's fake, but so what? But there's speech a la January 6th that can be harmful. Do you foresee any sanctions after the fact on people who promulgate insightful fake news? How do you feel about that?
Well, if you're asking me, the question is it news, or is it some kind of call to action to take some kind of illegal action? Because all through history, to the extent that there's an action or a conspiracy to engage in a particular illegal act, there are criminal actions about that. The concern that I have is when you're just looking at it in advance and saying, we don't want people to be able to say certain things that don't have that immediate impact of calling, even someone calling fire. You can't really police someone calling fire in a crowded theater and stop people from doing that in advance. You can just punish them after the fact if it is truly was a lie designed to create a panic. But sometimes people thought there was a fire. So mostly our laws in this country are designed to impose consequences when people say things that are beyond the protection of the First Amendment. And all we have to do is look at other parts of the globe to see, it may not be perfect here, but it's a lot worse in other places where you can be sent to prison for 15 years for calling the invasion of the Ukraine an invasion or a war, where you can be put to death for saying something that's contrary to the particular government religion. These are other contrasts to what we have here.
Yeah, I would just add that, I think we do have to stick with and defend that marketplace of ideas concept that America has developed through Supreme Court cases over the years. That one of my favorite books is Freedom for the Thought We Hate by Anthony Lewis, and he talks about the first reference to the free trade ideas being back in 1919. There was Supreme Court Abrams versus the United States, and Oliver Wendell Holmes talked about that competition of the market. So we have to trust that the good ideas will sell and the bad ideas won't in this market. But we also, I think, have to recognize the market's this chaotic place now. You're hearing a lot of different voices. There's not many people policing it, and we don't want the government doing it, but we do want to be smarter shoppers in that market. And I think Lynette summed it up that you can't be arrested by saying there was the election's not legitimate. We don't want to criminalize that type of thing, but it is, clear and present danger. You get to the point if you're standing outside the Capitol. The example from Roger Williams Law School was like, you can say, I think all the pets should be free, but if you're standing outside of the pet store saying, you know what, I think the pets should be free, and here's a Molotov cocktail, what do you say? That's a different scenario.
Yeah, that is a really great observation. And in the media literacy world, we sometimes distinguish between like a subtype of media literacy that's sometimes called digital citizenship. And digital citizenship is learning about your social responsibilities as a media creator. Because if we're trying to take this chaotic marketplace, Ed, you're right, it's over the top chaotic. And we're trying to figure out, well, how does this marketplace get better? One way to do it would be to build in the creators, and that's all of us, by the way, we're all creators and consumers, build in the creators a sense of responsibility for being truthful, right? A sense of responsibility for being accountable, for being fair. And so ultimately the solution long-term is to have all creators have this sense of social responsibility and appreciation for unintended consequences of our actions. And that phenomenon of helping young people acquire that digital citizenship competency is understanding the law, right? Understanding how, like Lynette said, the law lets you do whatever you want, but after you break the law, you're going to have some consequences, right? These are really important things to think about when we're using Facebook, when we're using Snapchat, when we're using TikTok. We are still accountable for our speech and actions. And so in some ways, there's a little bit of hope. If we could only create a generation of people who were socially responsible communicators, the marketplace might get less chaotic, and then we'd all be the beneficiaries.
What about the difficulty of finding out what is true? The Providence Journal, newspapers, how much time and money do they spend probing their stories? You have breaking news on channel something or other, and poof, you have a 3-minute segment on something. But how much effort and money, I know the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post, but regular newspapers in terms of fake versus true news, how much manpower do they use to probe into what they're reporting?
That's what I do all day. That's why we drink so much coffee. We're trying to get to the truth 24/7, and that's the mission. And I think the people I've worked with throughout my career, they take that responsibility very seriously, and we're trying to get the truth, tell both sides of a story when you're reporting news, and it takes a lot of effort. And that's why, again, I think we need people to subscribe to newspapers. They're digital now. The Globe is more digital than in print and has been for a while. But whatever platform to support that kind of news gathering, because there's a lot of information available for free, but you really do get what you pay for. If you're just going by what someone shared on Facebook, that may or may not be true. You've got to everybody needs to establish a stable of reliable sources that they, just like a reporter, there's some people I depend on to tell me what's going on, and some people, yeah, I don't know, you're not so sure. So, develop 4 or 5 go-to sources for your information.
Yeah, it's interesting. In a way, news is the least of our problems right now, because most of the dangerous content and the dangerous propaganda comes to us. It appears to be entertainment. And that's why we share it, because it makes us laugh, right? Or it shocks us, or it surprises us. And so actually, if we can't really think about this as just about news, because it's actually about opinions that are shared from peer to peer. Right. And so that's why it's a little bit, it's too narrow to think about this only as something that journalists can address, right? Or that news can solve, because a lot of the truly dangerous content that is out there is coming from my Uncle Bernie, right?
Yeah.
And he just made it up.
Yeah. Yeah, like, the conspiracy theories that, there was a child sex ring in a pizza place, led by Democratic leadership. That wasn't like a mistaken Washington Post story. That was a conspiracy theory spread by social media and different channels and 4chan or whatever. And so yeah, when I said we're not the gatekeepers anymore, it's not just coming. What people are hearing is coming from a wide variety of sources. Some very suspect, and some lots with partisan angles, lots with just ill intent.
Yeah. And of course, that stuff is constitutionally protected. And that's Lynette's job to remind us about that. My job is to help people recognize that the stuff that makes you laugh or makes you cry is the stuff that you're probably not critically thinking about. Because if it activates strong emotions, it's generally bypassing the head and going straight for the heart. And so whenever you find yourself emotionally activated by any kind of media content, entertainment, persuasion, or information, like little warning signs should go off, right? Why am I being made to feel this way, right? Because sometimes it's for a good reason, but sometimes it's for another reason that we need to be critical of.
Well, it's one of the real dangers, the difficulty of established news organizations to do their stuff. I mean, the Globe is alive, but many newspapers across the country are waning. I think Portland, Oregon, 3 days a week, Detroit, 2 days a week. Thomas Hardy talks about an English village alive enough to have strength to die. And that's how many newspapers are in this country, relying on AP and, subscribing to the Times or something. Is that a major danger for our democracy?
That's a huge danger to our democracy. There's been, University of North Carolina did a study about news deserts, how many communities have no reliable sources of news. Many smaller papers have closed over the years, thousands. The number of people in newsrooms is in half from a decade ago or so. It's a crisis. There are papers like the Globe that are doing well and investing as they have here in Providence. And but a lot of hedge funds have bought up newspapers and drain resources from them. So yeah, it's kind of bleak out there, and I think the consequence of that retrenchment is and studies have shown that there's more partisanship. The things that fill that void aren't truth seekers. It's often people peddling something for their own benefit and not necessarily the truth or spinning the truth. So there's a need. I mean, there's groups like Report for America sending people out there because it's kind of an American crisis that needs to be addressed in one way or the other.
I don't know. I have a different perspective on this. I think with trust in journalism at an all-time low and keep getting lower, then we do want to look at well, who do people put their trust in? Who do people feel are trustworthy? And what we have happening online right now is the rise of a kind of a different sense of who you can trust. It might not be rooted in expertise, and it might not be rooted in independent journalism. Sometimes it's rooted in partisanship. And the First Amendment was written during a time when the only news we had was partisan news. So influencers, advocates, activists who are out there on YouTube, you know, pitching ideas and trying to make change in society, who are speaking their truth as their lived experience with their eyewitness video cameras of police brutality. They're functioning as citizens in a democracy too. And I actually feel like, I'm not sure what the future of journalism has, but I know that people seek the truth, and they may find it in a variety of different places now, but we're all responsible for finding the truth as we know it.
It's to sort of follow on Renee's point of information, you trust whom you trust, you like whom you like. Last week's participants, students were especially excited about their civic engagement experience, maybe because post-COVID they talked to people, and they talked to so many other people that physically they met them, they talked to them, and we don't do that anymore. The notion of bowling alone. And COVID has exacerbated it, but we seem to be in political silos where we're talking to people who think exactly the way we think. No more town hall kind of enthusiasm. How can we encourage more people to talk to each other as opposed to, here I am, here you are, and we won't meet? Do you have thoughts on broadening? I mean, we're not the Ukraine where everyone gathers, but we don't even congregate at all. What are your thoughts on political?
I mean, you know, there's no question that the social media platforms have allowed people to take shots at each other from a distance, and I think have exacerbated a lot of people's willingness to say horrible things about each other. But I mean, I've been through the last 2 years with the rest of you, and I've looked at those videos of the school committee meetings where everybody's congregated in the same place. And I'm, you know, I mean, I think we can have problems wherever we are. I do think that, you know, I'm not qualified to speak on this subject, because what I do is try to enforce the First Amendment rights of everybody. And, you know, and you're looking at it from a much more 30,000 foot as to what kinds of mechanisms can, you know, our community encourage so that people have more respectful discourse, which would be a wonderful thing, because you can get your point across without the insults. But we're seeing it the other way now, both in person and online. I think at some point the social media platforms to a degree have been coming around, probably not enough, but I mean, you know, we've seen them take down sites, we've seen them put up markers, you know, and they could do more if they want to be responsible members of the community. But a lot of that has to do with how they make their money. One of the things, just to go back to a different subject, that what Ed was talking about is, you know, it looked like the print media and the newspapers were going to go totally out of business until they figured out how to monetize their online presence. And so I think there's hope for, you know, because they do their advertising online now, and I think it's made a huge difference. There's hope that that's going to come around. And the other thing that Renee was talking about is the citizen journalist, which is a product of the availability of things like, you know, iPhones and other phone cams, and the ability to post directly online, which has created a whole new range of access to information that people didn't have before. So, you know, things change, but they're not all bad.
Yeah, I think some of the values seen, as Renee mentioned, the videos of police brutality, citizen journalists out there being where you know, daily journalists can't be, and telling the truth. The downside of what Renee is talking about is that you know, the truth is a lot of people just they're relying on people who believe what they believe. They're hearing what they want to hear. They're creating a little cocoons where they don't hear any contrary voices. And that's part of what's driven this trend that we're seeing of the nationalization of politics. It's not like the Rhode Island Republic, you know, there's still regional statewide differences from one part of the country to the other, but a lot of it's like you're on one team or the other. It's like a sporting event almost, no matter where you are. And you know, I think part of the reason for that is local journalism. It was like a glue. If you're reading the Valley Breeze, you're not reading as a Republican or a Democrat. You're reading it to find out what's going on in Pawtucket and what road they're going to pave. You know, and so I think that local journalism served a purpose in creating community, and I wish there were more Valley Breezes out there.
I'm sure the people in Valley Breeze also feel the same way. One suggestion behind the explosion of the big lie kind of news, and that whatever the government promulgates is idiotic or mean or malign, is somebody's called it national paranoia, that people are inclined to just mistrust Uncle Sam deeply. Do you see this as recent, as problematic, are we a paranoid nation?
You know, it's really interesting is if you're studying history, you know that we were a paranoid nation when we wrote the Constitution. And there were people who said, damn it, we can't have a government like this unless we have a Bill of Rights that protects people from government. So I feel like we've always been a paranoid people all the way back to the writing of the Bill of Rights. And thank goodness that we recognize the importance of protecting individual liberty as part of our rights and responsibilities as citizens.
Okay, and Lynette,
I'm gonna
you're paranoid.
No, Joan, I'm going to interject because we have a couple of audience member questions. Can we, if we can
Sure.
get these in here?
One question is, what do you think needs to happen to teach students and adults media literacy? How do you teach people how to read the media? So Renee, how do you?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And of course, it's different for people of different ages. When you have a 4-year-old, maybe a child or a grandchild in the house, you can start teaching media literacy by introducing this idea that everything we see on a screen has been framed, right? And when you're looking through a frame, you're seeing something, but you're not seeing other things. So the idea that media present messages that are selective and incomplete is an idea that you can introduce with preschoolers, but it has powerful implications all the way up, right? Media messages are selective and incomplete. One way to spot the point of view of a media message, this is really important. Remember, we talked about always identify the author, always try to make an inference, a guess about the purpose. You can't always tell. Authors don't always state their purposes directly. Sometimes you have to use clues and see what their purpose is. But to spot their point of view, it's always useful to look for what's missing. Remember, like if I'm making a choice about what to call your attention to, right? Then one way to find my point of view is to notice, what am I not saying? What am I not telling? So learning to spot omissions is a really important way to recognize the point of view that's embedded in any media message. If it's news, if it's a book, if it's social media, if it's a film, whatever, documentary, whatever. And the trick is there's no shortcut to being well-informed. Right? That's the only way you can spot an omission, is if you're going to read widely and understand the world broadly, and then you can recognize those omissions. So there's a shortcut to a good humanistic liberal arts education. And some people have said that media literacy is kind of like the 21st century liberal arts education for that reason.
Okay, and what do you think?
I'll
Somebody
keep,
going on the web.
my top tip would be to stop sharing stories you haven't read. I don't know how many people just hit share based on the headline and they don't read it and they don't know where it came from and it spreads viral. We need to have the truth go viral more often.
Okay, Lynette, what are your thoughts on what would you teach young people as they go through TikTok and Facebook and all the blogs?
Well, I mean, there are so many sources of information or entertainment that you could spend, 24/7 just doing that. If you're talking about teaching young people, spending some time in school where you're not just doing that, having courses that encourage critical thinking and not, as one of the speakers mentioned, just memorizing dates, is critically important so that people have the ability to read and to process information on their own. I mean, I have no presence on any of those social medias, so I don't know how mind-numbing they might be. And that's deliberate on my part. Sorry, Renee, I know that's your job, but I don't do it. Spend enough time with the emails and reading the news, but I avoid the rest.
We have another question from everyone that relates to the silos we are all in. The person writes that social media is a type of echo chamber where people largely view and absorb the news they want to see, which to some extent reinforces what people would prefer to be true as opposed to what is objectively true. And the question is, how do you expose people to a broader range of news and views if people themselves don't want to engage with people with opposing viewpoints? How do you force people to break down their silos and listen to each other?
Yeah, you can't force anybody to do anything. I used to think that I could advise my students to consume media from a diverse array of sources, but I myself could barely stand to watch Fox News for more than 5 minutes. So it was like, okay, if I didn't want to do it, then what am I recommending that, right? So what I've found is it's really useful for you to think about your spheres of influence or the people who are influencing you, right? And to intentionally be strategic about that. So here at the League of Women Voters RI, here we are in a discourse community, right? A group of people. In my grief group, which is on Facebook, by the way, Lynette, which is a set of very meaningful relationships that I have with other mothers who have lost children to opioid addiction. In my grief group, I encounter people from all over the country who have very different ideologies than me. And in our shared connection through grief, we open up all kinds of conversations, including political conversations, including issues like regulating big pharma, including questions all that transcend right-wing or left-wing politics. So I feel like it is our obligation to participate in communities that are meaningful to us, but that if you look around on Facebook, if you look around on Twitter, you can find those ideologically diverse communities, and they can be meaningful and interesting to you.
I think in teaching some journalism courses, I've put that chart up on the screen for students to show them on the continuum of reliable and right-wing or left-wing. And I do still encourage people to read those news organizations in the middle, Associated Press and things like that, that are both reliable and nonpartisan. I do think that they serve a very valuable resource, even today, even with all that social media out there, because so much of what you see on social media is based on what real reporters went out and found out and verified. But yeah, it can be tough. And, like I did a story recently about a law student who had been, a Black law student who had been stopped by a white sheriff's deputy who assumed she was a defendant. She was a student attorney, But you know, my story went out on the Globe. It didn't have nearly as big an audience as her TikTok video. 350,000 people saw that TikTok video, and it just was a recent lesson for me that that's how people are learning about what's going on in the world today. My kids are not going to be getting a newspaper on their stoop. They're going to be getting it through TikTok or whatever's next. So yeah, I think we need a TikTok video about Oliver Wendell Holmes's marketplace of ideas. That's my suggestion for tonight. That's my takeaway.
And do you think that it's going to go viral?
We have one question.
I would watch it. I'll have to say that, yeah.
We have one question.
Let me just, that raises a question I want to raise for everybody is, you know, are we preaching to the choir here tonight? You know, how do you convince the people who really need to see an event talking about media literacy and the importance to democracy?
Well, just a quick question for Ed on that. Sometimes wacko theories gain legs and traction because the mainstream media feels it must refute it. Kind of, when did you stop beating your wife kind of thing. So at what point does a newspaper start reporting about the pizza parlor that was a pornographic mecca? And does that give it legitimacy? At what point, you know, you can ignore it. It's all these like aliens overtaking the minds of some legislators. It's easy to overlook those ideas, but at what point, when a respected newspaper starts writing that this is an idiotic idea, does that gain legs? What do you think?
I mean, I would just say that in terms of like the whole QAnon, that's been reported extensively, and you know, and I think appropriately, and the responsible media is doing what it can to expose the truth, and also to talk about people who've gone down the rabbit hole and can't be retrieved. And it's informative to the general public so that people understand what's going on. I don't, you know, I mean, that's like, you know, covering, in some respects, covering the March on Skokie. I mean, do you just ignore it because you don't want to give any fuel? That goes way back, long before the whole social media. But I think that one of the stories that that went viral, and it was just reported again this year, I think her name is Sedona Prince, the basketball player who used, I think it was Instagram, to show the disparities between the women's weight room and the men's for the NCAA basketball tournaments, and there was nothing like that to generate a whole response that was then covered extensively. So I think there's, you know, it goes back and forth in terms of the value of the citizen journalist, if you will, and the you know, the whole newspaper and print news business are both supporting each other in terms of getting information out.
What I really love about that answer, Lynette, is that you're underlining this idea of the attention economy, right? That what we pay attention to is shaped by the economic contexts around media messages. And that means that there's some kind of social responsibility about deciding what you pay attention to and then what you draw attention to. So I think it's really good for news organizations to resist the urge to amplify harmful propaganda just because it will sell more newspapers, right? I think that's a form of social responsibility. And I think that's true for not just newspapers, but all media. We should all think about ourselves as being responsible for not amplifying harmful and dangerous propaganda.
Yeah, and I think the most recent example we've been talking about is the claims of a stolen election, and we can't ignore that and pretend that people aren't going to hear the former president of the United States making that claim, or his supporters. You know, that message is going to be out there. I think it's the responsibility of journalists everywhere to report what the facts are, that there was no findings of significant fraud. We needed to cover the court cases where Giuliani and others brought those into court, and what the results of those were. So, you know, I think, you know, I think I said it earlier, that our job is to report the truth. And if it's about a false claim, we call it what it is, a lie.
Okay, we have one question that looks to the future, asking how will the upcoming elections be different, given the lack of trust in the media and the whole fake news campaign promoted by politicians? Do you think that in 2 years, our elections, our campaigning will look different?
Well, I just wrote a book on propaganda, so I guess I'll start, right? So it turns out that political campaigns are the oldest and most well-respected form of propaganda that we use as part of the way we do democracy, right? So we're going to hear voices of self-interested stakeholders who are going to try to activate our strong emotions, bypass our critical thinking to get us to make a decision based on our gut, right? And so political propaganda is not the enemy. It's always been part of the way we do democracy. I think we should respect it, and we should honor it, and we should notice what political propaganda does to push our buttons, right? How it influences us. Once we really understand that, then we do gain a little bit of immunity.
Okay, Ed, do you agree? I think January 6th, from a League of Women Voters perspective, pushed a few buttons.
Absolutely. You know, one thing we had at the Providence Journal when I was there was PoliticFact, where in real time you would test or verify or undercut the claims that politicians were making. You know, there was reluctance sometimes to carry some of the former president's news conferences live. You know, there was a need for fact checking there in real time. So, you know, that's one service I think we can provide going forward, that Democrats or Republicans make sure that the public knows what they're saying, whether it's true or not, and provide the facts so they have some context for these.
Yeah, but I do appreciate William Rickey's comment in the chat that fact checking also does have an ideology. Fact checking has a point of view because all media messages have a point of view. So recognizing that if you choose PolitiFact, that's got one ideological frame. If you choose fact checking at Annenberg, that's a different, that's going to provide you a slightly different nuance. If you pick the Washington Post with the Pinocchios, that's going to be slightly different even still. So I think we don't want to put fact checking up on a pedestal, because we want to recognize it's got a point of view as well.
Well, yeah, I guess to an extent, but I mean, I think often partisans make that argument to try to undercut an attempt to fact check what they're saying, and you know, I think it's a good service. It may not, you know, be completely neutral, but that's what a lot of journalists are attempting when they try to test the statements from both parties and let the results speak for themselves.
We have one question just for Ed, and it's kind of a hard one. Do you see a future for print journalism, given how easy and cheap all the other media outlets are?
I see a future for journalism. I don't think, you know, the future is not in delivering a piece of paper to your doorstep, but the Globe is proven you can do it. They have more digital subscribers than print subscribers. They're successful. They're expanding and investing. It's not impossible. It's you see it right here in New England, and there's other examples around the country. It's technology is part of what the obstacles that journalism is facing. So is the big chains and the hedge fund managers draining resources from some of these media companies. So, it's a multi-front war, but it's important, and it has implications for democracy.
Thank you. Well, we want to end with a semi-positive note, a positive note, to go back to Malcolm Muggeridge's Frankenstein monster, which we recognize as part of the public meeting space and essential to democracy, and it's here. What can audience members do to make sure that fake news doesn't undermine our democracy, and to promote the citizen journalist, to promote a healthier democracy and a healthier society? What can audience members do? Lynette, want to start?
I mean, the kinds of things that individuals can do is be an avid consumer of information and be critical about it. Exercise your right to vote and hold your elected officials accountable to tell you the truth. And whatever citizen advocacy that goes along with that in terms of participating in meetings, hearings, writing to your newspaper or whatever else, and organizing in whatever. I mean, it's not just all political. A lot of it is other kinds of groups that you believe in terms of like climate or education, or your neighborhood, whatever it is, to continue to participate in your government and make it responsive to you, as opposed to giving up.
That is upbeat. Renee?
I think that more parents and business leaders and people in the community need to be advocates for bringing media literacy education into schools. We did a study in the state of Rhode Island, and we found that only about 1/3 of students in Rhode Island get an opportunity to learn about media literacy in schools. And this varies really widely, because in West Warwick, students get media literacy learning opportunities in elementary school, in middle school, and secondary school. But in Warwick, right nearby, they don't. So I think parents and business leaders and community people need to be advocates for bringing media literacy education into schools. And it's not going to happen without advocacy from inside communities, because schools are locally funded and locally organized. There's the curriculum comes from the community. So let's get more parents and community advocates who see themselves as helping media literacy to come to the next generation.
Okay, Ed?
I do think with this chaotic marketplace of ideas that the younger generation is growing up in, that there is a need for civics education and media literacy to help them make sense of it and be smart consumers, because there are many more outlets, many more rabbit holes you can go down that I didn't grow up with, and there's fewer gatekeepers who are trying to get at the truth. And I think we need more fact checkers, not fewer. Striving, maybe imperfectly, but trying to get to the truth as opposed to partisan viewpoints. So, I think you've got to support those outlets, the TV stations, the local newspapers, so that and they'll be online in the future, but someone needs to pay them to go to the State House, go to the courthouse, go down to Providence City Hall and get the news, because the guy with an opinion on Facebook's not doing that. Don't share stories you haven't read, and support groups like the New England First Amendment Coalition that's fighting for First Amendment rights for everybody.
Well, I think this ends on an upbeat note for democracy, at least from the League of Women Voters vantage. I do hope it does. Thank you very much, all of you, for sharing your thoughts in this conversation. We are grateful. The League, Lippitt House Museum, we all are grateful. And have a wonderful evening.
Yes, we want to thank you all so much for coming tonight, and we will be sending out a short evaluation. So hope that you will take just 2 minutes to fill that out when that comes in your email. And we will be posting this discussion on our YouTube channel, and we'll send out a link to that as well. And for those of you who are eager to get back into actual Lippert House, we will be opening for tours again in May. So stay tuned. And thank you so much, Renee, Lynette, Ed, and Joan.
Renee.